Okay, people, here we go with the much anticipated, at least by me, review. Actually, I have two reviews, so you will see this dress again unless I decide to change, which probably won't happen because it has taken me weeks to get to this review and nothing needs to prolong it any further. Today's review is Wicked, or The Life and Times of the Wicked Witch of the West by Gregory Maguire. And yes, before you ask, this review was prompted by the release of the movie. I had seen the show. Well, first, let's go all the way back. I read this book when it first came out, and I loved it. I do have a love-hate relationship because the next time I read it, which was a couple years later, I didn't love it so much. I was kind of appalled by some of the graphicness of certain content. Then I saw the show, and the show is absolutely brilliant, does not have anything to do with the book. And that's kind of why I wanted to reread it, because my sister messaged me and she goes, "Is it okay to bring my daughter to go see the movie or to read the book?" And I said, "Movie, yes. Book, absolutely not." While I remembered some things like the graphic nature of certain scenes, I couldn't quite remember what else I didn't like about this book, what else made it inappropriate for young children. So I dove right in, and different story altogether. This did prompt me to read The Wizard of Oz, which I think the last time I read it, I was probably 10. Reading The Wizard of Oz made me appreciate the books, whether I liked them or not, that gave another side of the story, because it was a very simple book, and even though it was only 4 hours long, it felt like forever. So the story that we know, it ends at the halfway point. And after that, it's about Dorothy and her friends getting back to Glinda so that she could go home. I couldn't understand the point of anything after the witch dying and the wizard leaving without Dorothy, except that I believe it sets up other books. And that's when my proclamation that books are always better is wrong. Because I would say that Wicked, the show, does a better job at exploring the characters and certain themes and really humanizing things and making them relevant. This book is more literary fiction than commercial fiction, whereas the show and now the movie are more commercial than literary. And what does that mean? It means literary focuses on character, commercial focuses on story. And I find character focus to be extremely tedious. I did look to see what the thoughts of other people were, and by and large, people liked this book. They like the messages and the themes that were explored because it dives into the concepts of evil, nurture versus nature, and propaganda and existentialism. Just to say existentialism tells you that I'm not going to like this book. And I liked, on a general level, what he went for. But I think where he went wrong for me was that he just touched on things and he didn't develop them. I couldn't understand the why behind the circumstances that he would present. And in Wicked, Elphaba is something special. She has a talent. She is someone that you look at and you reject. But there's so much more to her that if you actually got to know her, you'd realize how great she is and how special she is. In the book, she has no talent whatsoever. She really has no purpose whatsoever. I found myself not caring about her. Let's get into it and you can make your own decision. Elphaba, she's green, she's an outcast. She ends up at Shiz. She has a tumultuous relationship with Glinda, and then her political and socialist ambitions drive her in a different direction than the people around her. In the novel, we get those things, but they lack emphasis and expansion and development, which for me, that was the meat and potatoes of the matter. I would not have minded that this was Maguire's sermon on religious and political issues if it had had a point, but I felt like he really just wanted to do too many things, and so he could not focus on the things that could have made this novel interesting. A cut to the story. Elphaba. Her dad is a preacher named Frexbar, and her mother is a woman named Melina, who is the granddaughter of the Imminent Throp. So the Imminent Throp is basically the ruler, the governor of Munchkinland. She rebels against everything that she grew up knowing. This led to a lot of promiscuous behavior because in their line, everything goes to the female, and something that we learn is that she just wanted to get pregnant and have a boy so that her boy wouldn't have to face all the things that she had to face. She marries Frexbar, who I guess is really good in bed but has no personality outside of being in bed. Their marriage deteriorates to a certain level because he is driven by evangelizing to the lost people. At this point in time, a part of his flock is being subjected to the clock of the time dragon, which I thought this was so interesting. And we went nowhere with it. But the clock of the time dragon is this device that is led by this dwarf, and everywhere it goes, it essentially reveals the sins of the people in that town, but it's also about like lust and hedonism, and it's something that he doesn't think that his people need to be subjected to and swayed by. So he goes, the time dragon reveals the sins of these three people, and then it hops onto Frexbar, and what it says is that his wife had cuckolded him. We don't know anything about that, but at this point we are recognizing that whether we want to or not, we've got to believe that whatever this clock of the time dragon is saying is true. So he is now in danger for his life. I don't know why, but this riles up the people into a mob and they want to kill him. He's hidden away, but he's so worried about Melina. Melina is spirited away by some midwives. They end up delivering Elphaba, but as we all know, she is green. Not only is she green, but she's kind of feral. She's born with these razor sharp teeth, and she ends up biting off the finger of one of the midwives. She's an abomination. Fast forward, and she's a strange child. I would have really enjoyed us to explore that avenue because there's an emphasis on it that we never get a resolution for. All we get is that once she's at Shiz, Nanny says, wow, it's a good thing you grew out of that. That when your baby teeth fell out, you had normal ones grow back in. But there is this mystique surrounding her. She seems to have this awareness and this ability, but we don't know what it is. And we never figure out why she's such a strange child. Melina is lonely. One day, this quadling shows up, and his name is Turtleheart, and he's a glass blower. The wizard in this whole scenario, just like in Wicked, is not a good guy, and he's something of a tyrant. The worry is that in pursuit of building the yellow brick road, in pursuit of creating waterways, he's going to go to Quadling Country, he's going to dig up their land, he's going to discover the rubies underneath, and then he's just going to pillage. Turtleheart is like, I'm getting out of here. I don't want to be part of this. Melina falls in love with him. Frexbar is off doing his own thing, and Turtleheart is the one person that seems to have any influence at all over Elphaba. By this point, Frexbar has gone and gotten Melina's old nanny to come take care of Elphaba, but nothing anybody does seems to have the same kind of impact as Turtleheart. He seems to be this super gentle soul, and I don't know. Apparently he's like this amazing lover as well, even though he's not particularly attractive. But she is so pent up in that area that Melina's like, yeah, I'm gonna get me some of that. Eventually, it seems that Frex also gets into a relationship with Turtleheart, which I found disturbing only because he is so religious. I know there's this different social system going on in the world that Maguire has created, but it seems that he's a unionist, that his beliefs would prevent him from being in a same sex relationship or even condoning his wife being in extramarital relationships, or even to that point, them being like a threesome of sorts. But there is something about Turtleheart that connects with Elphaba. He does give her, he creates this mirror, which we see it one more time at the very end of the novel. So I was like, what was the point of this mirror? Because it seems so important. He creates this mirror, this looking glass that he gives to Elphaba. We have a scene in which Melina has taken some drugs, some medicine that will put her to sleep. Meanwhile, Frexbar and Turtleheart are off canoodling of sorts. Nanny looks around and she goes, "Where's Elphaba?" Nobody can find her. Why we had to get the entire family involved, I don't know, because Elphaba seems to be quite capable of taking care of herself. But yes, everybody in this house gets up and goes about trying to find her, including Melina. And I was like, dude, let Melina get her sleep. But they find her, and true to the movie / show, she does not like water. Yet they find her under a dock at the lake, sitting between the paws of a tiger with her looking glass saying, "Horrors, horrors." And I'm like, ooh, foreshadowing, what does this mean? That's where we end. And I'm like, ooh, this is super cool. We pick up, and it is divided into 5 sections. The first one is called Munchkinlanders, and now we are entering Gillikin. This is where we meet Galinda. Galinda is on her way to Shiz. She is very full of herself, very beautiful, but she's not actually that wealthy. And she meets Dr. Dillamond on the train. She does have a caretaker called Amma Clutch. However, at this point, Amma Clutch has stepped on a nail. She had requested that she could stay behind and go to the hospital, get it taken care of. Well, Galinda is on the train. She meets Dillamond, and she does not think much of him because he's a goat. But he is a very well-respected member of faculty, and he has a lot to say, and this is going into what you see in the show and the movie about animal rights and how they are being stripped of their rights. And even though he has this first-class carriage now, his mother and his grandmother could never have had it, and now his children won't be able to have it no matter how hard they work. And even he, probably on his next trip, won't have that right either, no matter how hard he works. It seems that not having Clutch there is great, because Galinda can be free to do whatever she wants. But as they're at orientation, she's noticing all the other Ammas getting together and gossiping and talking, and she's of course judging them. Well, yeah, she shouldn't have judged, because what they were doing was not frivolous chatter, it was connecting. And they're like, okay, who are the girls that we want to cavort with? Who are we going to try to room with? And now she's like, oh crap, I'm screwed. Even though I have an Amma, it doesn't matter because she's not here. So I'm gonna have to be in general population dormitory, and I refuse to do that. She goes up to Madame Morrible, who, she's still a pretty bad dude, but she is not dismissive of Galinda the way she is in the way that we're used to. She's the head of their house. And Galinda makes up this story about how she cannot be in a dorm because her Amma has these fits, and she's incapable of taking care of that many girls. Madame Morrible looks at her and she goes, well, is she capable of taking care of you and one other person? Galinda's like, yeah, I think she can do that. This is how she gets saddled with Elphaba. Just like in the story we all know and love, they don't get along because there's judgment towards Elphaba. Elphaba doesn't have any special talents or abilities. She is very socialist-minded though. She cares about the issues. She's also more even-tempered. All of the weirdness that we experienced from her in her childhood is no longer present. And I kept asking, why? Where did it go? There was something strange about her. So how did she just grow out of that? Because she was born that way. Like from the get-go, biting off that woman's finger. There was something off about her. I wanted to see, was it something that she grew out of? Was it something she had to work her way out of? Because Nanny did put her in like a daycare with other Munchkin kids. Was it something that she was with them and she had to face facts and somehow overcompensate for the way that she was born, and figure out how she's going to make it through life? Whatever the case, they don't have much to do with each other. Galinda goes and ingratiates herself with the popular crowd. They do have this one night in which they bond. It's heavily implied that they get stuck in the room because of a storm. But what's implied is the storm didn't affect anybody else. So it seems like something was directed at them, which again, is this Madame Morrible? And this is when it is almost problematic that I have seen the show and the movie, because now I have this impression of Madame Morrible that's not true to the novel. Well, Galinda in public still does not want anybody to know about her connection with Elphaba. But they are in a class where it's more like, I think, a poetry reading. Somehow they encounter Bach. We're all familiar with Bach. Bach is a Munchkinlander, and it turns out that Bach had been in the same daycare as Elphaba. She doesn't quite appreciate the fact that he brings this up, like anybody from her past would be around. Why? I don't know. We get very little characterization, and we do jump around between a lot of points of view. So we have Galinda, Elphaba, Bach, character later on named Lear, and then we also have the omniscient narrator. We have a little bit of Fiyero. So you'd think, because this was a long book, this was like 33 hours of my life. Yet, you think in all of that time, we would really start to dive into these characters and figure out their motivations and give them storylines, and there's none of that. It was almost like Maguire said, well, I want this to happen, and then I want this to happen, and then I want this to happen, but there's no rhyme or reason to get to all these things. We're just gonna be there. Bach falls in love with Galinda. Galinda could care less for him, although you gotta give him some chops because he does not let it go, and he uses Elphaba to get to Galinda because they're roommates, and this forces them to forge a friendship, or at least a mutual respect. And then summer rolls around. Galinda is invited to go to her friend Fanny's lake house with some of the other popular girls, whereas Elphaba and Bach stay at school. Bach and his friends end up working in a library, whereas Elphaba is helping Dr. Dillamond because he wants to further understand and explain animals with a capital A versus animals with an undercase A. Two other aspects of this novel that I thought were very intriguing yet went largely unresolved. We have the idea of Lurleen, who is some supernatural force very much like a god character. So there's the unnamed god, and then there's Lurleen, and then we also have the Cumbric Witch. I thought the Cumbric Witch was fascinating, and we have a character named Yackle that pops up throughout the novel, and I was like, ooh, she could be the Cumbric Witch. But we never really get a true explanation as to the Cumbric Witch and why she matters. Maybe it's me. Maybe it is me not wanting to put that much work into understanding this novel and all of the depth that Maguire is putting forth. I like things to be a little bit more straightforward than he was giving me, but in some of the stories, Lurleen, sorry, this is kind of gross. In some of the stories, Lurleen had gone to sleep, wakes up sometime later, and her bladder is so full that she urinates a river. All of the animals who cross this river turn into animals, and then the ones that don't are animals. The others are like, oh no, it was the unnamed god, and it was a similar situation, not like urinating a river, but he designated animals versus animals. Bach is in awe of Dr. Dillamond. He thinks very highly of Dr. Dillamond, but at Shiz, the girls and the boys are separated into different houses and they do not share professors, so he has no access to Dr. Dillamond. But when he encounters Elphaba and she tells him that she is working for Dr. Dillamond that summer, he's like, oh my gosh, can I be part of this? And she says, well, you know what? Actually, you could, because you're working in a library that neither of us has access to. One, because he's an animal, and two, because I'm a female, but you've got materials that I'm sure would be super helpful. So this entire summer, he and his friends are doing what Elphaba and Dr. Dillamond need in order to further their research. And then one day, Elphaba gets a letter. She gets a letter from Galinda inviting her to come visit, and she's like, why would I do that? This letter does not make sense. Why would Galinda want me to come visit her? Bach catches wind of this letter, and he encourages her to go to see Galinda, which actually, let me side note here and say that Amma Clutch is now in the infirmary because when the girls were going to sleep one night, she had seen something outside of their window and she had gone to investigate. The next day, Dr. Dillamond is found dead and Amma Clutch is suffering from this condition that Galinda had made up for her. So she is non-compos mentis in the hospital, and Nanny is going to come with Nessa Rose, who is Elphaba's younger sister, and she is going to be their new caretaker so that they do not have to be in general population. They go to the lake house, and Galinda is like, why are you here? And Elphaba goes, because you invited me. Turns out it was Fanny who had actually done it as a trick. But the thing was, Elphaba, girls does not get embarrassed. And she realized, you know what, if I run home with my tail between my legs, it is just proving her point, so I'm just going to stick around. So she hangs out in her room the entire time. I don't know, it was like a week long, I don't even know how long. Whereas Bach, who would come as her chaperone, hang out with the girls. And I'm just saying, this guy has balls of steel because he will not give up on Galinda. She has rejected him so many times and he will not take no for an answer. And I'm like, dude, at some point you just have to admit defeat. They all come back to the school, and this is when Nessa Rose arrives. We've gotten very little about Nessa Rose, Elphaba's family in general. So we do know that her mother has since died, but she did not die in childbirth with Nessa Rose. She died in childbirth with Shell, who is the brother. Nessa Rose is absolutely beautiful. She's everything Elphaba's not, except she doesn't have arms. She is also a unionist like her father, and she is staunchly devoted to her beliefs. She arrives and she's all uppity. They do share a room with Galinda and Elphaba, but Nanny and Nessa Rose are off in the room to the side, which apparently Nessa Rose thinks is unacceptable, but she's always around. Galinda doesn't quite care for her. It's also at this point that Galinda has become Glinda because, one, she is in agony over her part in Amma Clutch's condition because she knows Amma Clutch didn't suffer from any kind of condition. Yet now she's suffering from this made-up malady. She has, in deference to Dr. Dillamond and how rude she was to him on the train, decided to change her name from Galinda to Glinda. Thirdly, after whatever happens to Amma Clutch happens, she stops trusting Madame Morrible because Madame Morrible is the only person that she had divulged this lie to. So she knows whatever is happening to Amma Clutch is happening because of Madame Morrible. And Madame Morrible has this contraption called a grammatic. If you're familiar with The Wizard of Oz, there's the TikTok. So grammatic is supposed to be this TikTok. And neither Elphaba nor Glinda really care for the grammatic because something about him puts them off. Another result from this summer is that Glinda no longer cares to associate with her friend group anymore because she recognizes them as the shallow, selfish girls that they are. So why they continue to be part of her friend group, I don't know. There was so much that just happened but had no further exploration. More backstory that we get about Elphaba's family is that Melina has died, Turtleheart has also died, and I could not quite figure out what it was, but Frexbar holds himself responsible for Turtleheart's death. Somehow, Turtleheart got captured and beaten, tortured, whatever, and killed. Frexbar feels like it was his fault. This is a complicated novel. I couldn't find that moment that really explained why or how this all happened. Melina, though, also blamed Frexbar. In the wake of Melina's death, Frexbar packs everybody up and just carts them around Quadling Country. I guess this is his penance to Turtleheart. Of the three children, we don't know who Elphaba's father is. Nessarose may or may not be Turtleheart's daughter, but then Shell is absolutely Frexbar's son, and there's nothing wrong with him. It seems that Nessarose is disfigured because in an attempt to prevent her from suffering from the same condition as Elphaba, Nanny had gone to Yackle and had gotten her milkweed. This caused a deformity in Nessarose. At this point, Fiyero arrives, and it is no great love story, nothing like we know in the movie. He just arrives. They are in a class where the professor is messing around with some kind of animation powder. There's some kind of distraction that happens when he comes in. A pair of antlers gets animated, and then it comes after him and nearly kills him. There was so much that could have been done with all of this, and it wasn't. So I was hugely disappointed. Why can't we explore magic? What is it that these two girls are learning and getting good at and becoming threats about? In this same time period, Frex sends Nessarose the infamous shoes. In this novel, they're not a specific color because they're made of glass. They're just incredibly beautiful, and this, even though he's not as terrible to her in the book as he is in the movie, this is Frex's declaration that Nessarose is his favorite child because he neglects Elphaba altogether. After the shoes, and he had made these shoes based off of what Turtleheart had taught him about glass blowing. So I thought that was kind of interesting, but where's it going? Eventually, Madame Morrible comes and she's like, girls, Amma Clutch is not in good state. I think this is her time. So the girls, they go to see Amma Clutch. Glinda uses whatever capabilities she has to give Amma Clutch a sense of reality so that she's able to tell them that it was the Grommatic that killed Dr. Dillamond. From there, she dies. After the funeral, Madame Morrible pulls all three girls aside, and she essentially says, hey, I work for somebody very important. I cannot tell you who he is. I cannot tell you what our purpose is, but we think you three girls could be really helpful. And she puts them under a forgetting spell, but she essentially declares each of them will rule a certain part of Oz. So this is how Glinda becomes Good Witch of the North, how Nessarose becomes the Wicked Witch of the East, and how Elphaba is going to become the Wicked Witch of the West. They go off, and Elphaba's the only one that has any sort of memory about this. Glinda, who as they're walking away, she has a grasp on what happened, but then the further and further away they get, the more she starts to doubt what she remembers. So did they actually get put under a spell? I don't know. This is brought up once more at the end of the book, but again, so much opportunity with this, and it went absolutely nowhere. And what was the purpose of it, honestly? The three girls, they return, and the friend group, minus Nessarose, is going to go to the philosophy club. except for Glinda and Elphaba. While everybody else is going to the philosophy club, Glinda and Elphaba are gonna go to the Emerald City. The philosophy club, I distinctly remember as one of those things that made me not want to read this book that second time through, because it was a little too raunchy for me. But now that I read it this time, there was really nothing there at all. There was nothing graphic, but everybody goes to this club. Their tickets are all pulled to be part of this extra special sexual experience. So they go, and it's very vague. It's very cloak and dagger. It's something about a tiger and a woman and them under kind of like this spell, and one of the company gets tied beneath this tiger, and then this tiger, I guess they're gonna have sexual acts that they're doing, but then there's just also this woman that's gonna be there, and very hedonistic, everybody gets naked, but we don't actually know what happens. And I was like, what? Meanwhile, Glinda and Elphaba spend a week or two getting to the Emerald City. When they get there, Elphaba speaks to the wizard because she is very concerned about animal rights and the death of Dr. Dillamond. But literally, no conversation takes place. She says, "This is why I'm here." A couple other words are had, but nothing actually gets discussed or resolved. But what it does do is it proves to Elphaba that she needs to do something more. She sends Glinda back to Shiz, where she decides she's going to make her own way, and nobody sees her for the next couple years. This is when we jump into section 3, which is the City of Emerald. It's been about 5 years, and Elphaba has been in the Emerald City this entire time. She is part of an underground movement called the Animal Relief League, and I'm thinking, okay, even though she has no magical prowess whatsoever, she is making things happen. She's making a difference. No, she's still a foot soldier. And this entire time, what has she done? I really don't know. But Fiyero stumbles across her. He follows her to where she lives because she's being really cagey. They begin an affair. He is married. When he was at Shiz, he already revealed to them that he had been married since he was a child, but he had never actually met her. Now they've met, they have a couple kids, but it's a loveless marriage. There's no passion, it just is. They begin an affair, and he decides, I'm just gonna stay in the Emerald City. He's there on business, and so he just lies to his wife, and he's like, look, I'm just gonna have to be here for a couple of months. So they're doing their thing, but every now and again, Elphaba is like, hey, we can't have anything to do with each other because I've got something to do for this secret organization that I'm part of. It boils down to, it's kind of like Christmas. They call it Lurleen-Miss. To me, it is Christmas. She has a super important job to do. She tells Fiyero, I don't want you anywhere near here. I don't want you anywhere near where I live. Things are gonna be dangerous. I think it's this very same day. He's kind of out and about in town, and he witnesses some abuse of animals. We're still getting this idea that they are a second-class citizen. We could have used more. I can't wait for the second movie in the Wicked duology, because I can't wait to see how they're going to dive into it. But we're seeing that here, and I think it's really important. It's a great message, but really, it makes no difference to the novel, except it is Maguire's platform. He wants to get out his own thoughts and beliefs on these things. He ends up following Elphaba because he wants to know what she's doing. He sees that she is supposed to kill Madame Morrible. Unfortunately, what happens is Madame Morrible is going to a church, and then all of these girls come out from a girls' school, and Elphaba cannot bring herself to kill Madame Morrible in the presence of all these children. So Madame Morrible goes inside. Fiyero says, well, I guess I'm just gonna go home. So he goes to Elphaba's house, where he is attacked by the Gale Force, which is the wizard's armed guards that go out to do his bidding and get rid of people that he doesn't want around. I read in a review, Elphaba has a cat. I read in a review that they were turned in because of that cat, because it wasn't a cat, it was a cat. I could not find anywhere in this novel to indicate that that cat was an animal versus an animal. There is only one instance in which he is losing consciousness after he gets a blow, and that the cat's eyes glow in the dark. And then the cat leaves the apartment. That's all. I thought that was really cool, because how else were they found out except Elphaba is not as good at sneaking around as she thinks she is, so I'm sure that somehow, some way, someone cottoned on to her and what she was doing, and they figured out where she lived. After the whole Madame Morrible incident, for some reason, they're like, we're going to ambush her at her home, and instead they got to Fiyero first. When it comes to Fiyero's death, we actually don't know anything. In the movie, it is that she turns him into a scarecrow rather than let him die, but in the book, we don't know what happened to him. We assume he died, but his body never shows up. The next scene is Elphaba showing up at a convent. She is devastated. She has gone mute, and the Monts bring her in. She has a conversation with Mother Yackle. Mother Yackle gives her a broom, and scene. Now, we're going to wait for part 2.